That's why I was so glad when I originally heard that PBS, the public broadcasting service, had spent millions of taxpayer dollars to finance an 11-part documentary series called America at a Crossroads. To quote, explore the challenges confronting the post-9/11 world. Well, one of the 11 parts, the most interesting, at least to me, was one called Islam versus Islamicists. This is just another word for extremist. This episode focused on how moderate Muslims everywhere, from the US to the UK to France, are clashing with Muslim fundamentalists. But the real story is, you're probably never ever going to see this documentary. PBS says they're delaying the release because the film, quote, is a mess. They say it has no structure, it wasn't ready in time, it's weak, it's incoherent, bloody, 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 bloody. I got 2 pages from PBS explaining. To be honest with you, after reading their explanation, if I hadn't have gone through the exposed experience on this program, I probably would have been inclined to believe them. Unfortunately, I've seen how these things work from inside the newsroom. What you have to understand, and you only get this from standing in a newsroom, is there are 2 completely different schools of thought on who's responsible for radical Islam. There are those who believe that the West and poverty causes the problem, and in some cases we deserve everything we get. While others, like me, tend to blame the madrasas, the culture of hate, the extremists themselves who are only interested in a political agenda. That clash of ideas is real, and it is happening in newsrooms all over the globe. And I bet you that PBS is no different. But unlike the others who will take this material on, PBS has another problem. It's called government money. When you're a taxpayer program, when you are funded by you and me, there's another level of political correctness that you have got to worry about, or else you run the risk of alienating enough people and you put yourself out of business. That's why I think the real story is simple. PBS is frightened. They are scared of the groups that will inevitably threaten them with the boycotts, lawsuits. More importantly, they are scared of a lobbying campaign in Congress that could threaten their very funding. When your budget is at stake, it is only natural to stay away from controversy. But let me ask you this. Where is the controversy? Why is it okay for me to show what the media calls a firebrand radical cleric that is spewing hate against the West, but it somehow or another is controversial for me to show a Muslim denouncing that same cleric? Why can we run Osama bin Laden's latest propaganda video on the 6 o'clock news, but everybody's got to walk on eggshells if we want to put on a Muslim who says that's not what the Quran says? The Quran preaches peace. There are 2 sides to every story. And PBS has one, but my gut and my honestly limited experience tell me that the truth lies closer to the filmmakers. Of course, there is an easy way to settle this. We called PBS. Let me see the film. PBS, I'll watch it with an open mind. Let me look at it. If it is incoherent or just really unbalanced, honestly, I hope you're right. I'll get that message out for you. I hope the film is a mess, because that means it's being pulled for a plot, not politics. Unfortunately, knowing what I know, I sincerely doubt that's the case, and PBS ain't going to show it to me. Martin Burke is the film's producer. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, he is from American Islamic Forum on Democracy. He is one of the moderate voices featured in this documentary and a new contributor to this program. Martin, let me start with you. You believe your film is being tampered with in ways that undermine journalistic independence. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, well, I'll give you one example. We were doing an investigative report on how the Nation of Islam, the so-called black Muslims in Chicago, were being funded by the Saudi Arabian fundamentalists through the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. And PBS, through WETA, the flagship station in Washington, appointed an advisor to oversee our efforts. And that advisor was from the Nation of Islam. I have never, ever heard of an investigative unit having to report to a person from the very place they are investigating. That was the first thing. And of course we protested that. We said this is just not journalism as we understand it in America.
Okay, so anybody knows, let me just give a quick highlight of who you are. You're the guy who did the documentary on the Pirates of Silicon Valley. You're not some jokester. You're not me doing a special. And you had real, credible journalist on this project with you.
Yeah, well, if I can even take that a step further, we hired a team which included a Pulitzer Prize nominee from last year for his coverage of Islam in Europe. We had a woman and her team from Toronto, Canada, from the Toronto Star, who were profiled in the New York Times as being one of the top journalistic teams in this field. We had investigative reporters from Scandinavia who had won every award in their field. This was a first-rate team, which we, my partners Frank Gaffney and Alex Alexiev, had to convince them, and they had to convince us. This was a rigorous interpretation of the facts.
Zuhdi, what is it that was in this that America's just not going to see?
It was basically about, I believe, the struggle of moderates and why, you know, when you ask where are the moderate voices, it's Martin basically interviewed some of the imams, interviewed some of the leading Muslim propagandists locally that have tried to suffocate our voice at the American Islamic Forum, that don't want me to get out the fact that I love the spirituality of my faith and I want to raise my kids Muslim, but I don't want them to hijack my faith for their political motives and their political agenda.
Let me further this with you, because you're, in many ways, to Muslims, you are a credible voice, where PBS came back to me today and said, Irshad Manji is on. And I love Irshad Manji. She's been on this program. But I will tell you that because of her lifestyle, a lot of Muslims say, well, she's not really a Muslim, etc., etc. You are a guy who lives every word of the Quran in all of its ways, correct?
Yes, you could call me a social conservative even. And, you know, I love the spirituality, but my choice to live socially conservative is mine alone. It should not be governments, it should not be the imams, and they've stolen our pulpits for their political agenda. And when we get a story, a documentary that shows how the only pulpit I have to speak from is the media, they want to suffocate that and not let the world hear about it.
Martin, your film was called Irresponsible because it's alarmist and unfair. How much danger do you think, you've been in this business for a while, how much danger do you think there is when there's this kind of political correctness and pressure going on to get another side out of a story? How much trouble are we in?
Glenn, first of all, the comments on our film became increasingly hysterical from the PBS people after we decided we were not going to be apologists for the Islamists who are silencing the moderate Muslims around the world. And by silencing, I mean, we traipsed around Paris with a guy that had police protection 24 hours a day. We spent time with a member of parliament over in Denmark who is under police guard because he is a member of parliament. The Islamists do not want their own to participate in democracy. And by the way, a very important thing that you mentioned, they will call people like Zuhdi not real Muslims because he believes in a Western way of life, because he believes in democracy and the separation of church of state. And by the way, that's exactly what PBS is doing to them. They sort of have told us in so many words that people like Zuhdi have become westernized, so they can't really be Muslims. This small group, and I want to emphasize, it's a small group within WETA and PBS, have decided they speak for the Muslims.
Okay, let me ask you this, because when we did the extremist agenda, I mean, I'm not kidding you. People were on the phone trying to get the special pulled all the way till it aired. There are people who vehemently disagree. Do you believe it was out of fear, or these people just say it's not that big of a problem? What's their motivation for this? Do you believe?
I think there were two. I think there are two different reasons. One is, I committed the unforgivable sin in their eyes of being partnered with two conservatives, Frank Gaffney and Alex Alexiev. And shortly after they took over the series, they flew to Toronto, Canada, where I was for a while, and met me and said, fire your partners. I said, wait a minute, I did a film on the Hollywood 10, on blacklisting in Hollywood, and I am not about to fire my partners for their political beliefs. And they uttered a statement that I never thought I would hear in America. They said, don't you check into the political beliefs of the people you work with?
Oh my gosh.
For the record, I just want to say, I couldn't have cared less about the politics of the people we put on the air in this show, or I say on the air advisedly, because I have socialists, I have people who are conservatives on the air. It did not matter what their politics were. Okay. They were the moderate Muslims who had a right to speak out.
Martin, Zuhdi, I would love to spend more time on this subject. I'd love to invite you to the radio program tomorrow. Let's try to work that out. And thanks. That is The Real Story tonight.